Hello, Internet, and welcome back to another episode of Meet La Prensa. If you watch this video and you find some value in what you're seeing here, be sure to hit like and subscribe at the end. Tonight, we have another very special guest for you. Estefany Méndez is a television producer in the San Francisco Bay Area. Welcome, Estefany. It's wonderful to see you again.
Saludos. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. So Estefany and I met during my brief and inglorious time as National Association of Hispanic Journalists, Bay Area chapter president out there. And it came across my radar that you have this incredible identity of being Latina, but also being undocumented in the news business. You're actually our first undocumented guest, so thank you so much for coming on. The question I have is pretty broad. Just what are some of the challenges you faced, first as an undocumented person and also as a Latina in the news business?
I think the first time that it really affected me was back when Donald Trump was running for the presidential elections. And I remember that day, the latest results were coming in and I was producing the main show. And I had to hold it together. You know, as a journalist, you have to be, you can't pick sides, and especially when it comes to issues such as immigration. You know, as a Latina, knowing that this would impact me a lot, it was hard to show negative things of President Trump and his policies, or former President Trump and his policies, but also I had to like I said, hold it together, especially to keep my team focused that day. And I remember when the results were coming in and they announced that he had won the election, after the show was over, I went to the bathroom and I just broke down in tears because I knew what that meant for me. I knew that could potentially mean the end of my career if he ended DACA, and also just kind of that hope that after President Obama decided to present the executive order on DACA, that gave me hope, and I think it gave hope to a lot of professionals. But with Trump winning, I knew that there were many challenges to come ahead. And soon after, I think it was 2 years later, I had to renew my DACA, which is it provides a permit so that we as undocumented immigrants can work legally here in the country. And I remember I had sent my renewal and I was waiting for it, but the deadline was approaching and I still hadn't heard anything from immigration. At that time, I was still working at Univision here in San Francisco, and HR kind of started harassing me, asking me, your permit's about to expire, when's it going to come? And I tell them, I know, I've sent it, I'm waiting on it. And I knew that under the current presidency, there's a lot going on. So, DACA renewals were not a priority to the administration. And there's nothing in my power that I could do to kind of expedite the case. So I remember the closer the date came along, the more pressure I had from HR. And so it got me thinking, here is this station, that advocates for immigrants, and it's all about, empowering the immigrant community, but yet they were going after, a dreamer who has always wanted to work at Univision. And instead of being supportive, it turned into a very dark environment, especially for me, because I felt I was already dealing with, what's going to happen, what if my permit doesn't arrive, but then I also had my employer going after me. So I remember it was 2 days before my permit expired. I was producing that day, the 6 o'clock show, and HR called me again to the office and said, hey, we haven't heard anything from your, about your permit. So what's your plan? What's going to happen? And I asked, I said, okay, if I finish my work and then we can talk about it, because, how could I focus on putting a show together when I have them asking me what's going to happen with my permit? And so after the show was over, I went back to HR, and they pretty much just said, since your permit hasn't arrived, today is going to be your last day, and you have to leave all Univision property here at the station. And so I was like, wait, what? I'm like, I still have 2 more days to work legally here, so why are you kicking me out? And so there was no explanation. I called my attorney. I called friends who advocate for immigrant rights, and I told them what had happened, what was happening to me. And they said, you have to pressure them, ask them to talk to corporate, see what they can do to help you to kind of protect your position. And they just said, if we can give you about a week, but if it takes a little bit longer, then you're just going to have to reapply for your job. And so I just felt like all the doors or support that I was hoping to get from a station that advocates, for immigrants was going to help me. But in the end, they just kind of kicked me out. So I think that was one of the hardest experiences that I had. And just a reminder, that yes, we do have 2 years to work legally in this country, but you never know. I mean, like, even if you're faithful to a corporation, in the end, they might turn their back when they say they're there to help people just like yourself.
Just to get this straight, it sounds like Univision leveraged your immigration status to, in essence, dismiss you. What is that like? How does that? Univision obviously is a channel that, like you say, is supposed to be the channel that stands up for immigrants, that stands up for us in this country. But like Mariana Atencio, another correspondent at MSNBC is also supposed to be more woke, more sort of progressive. And they told her when she came down to Washington for the White House Correspondents' Dinner not to look too Latina in her dress. So how much of this posturing at Univision is like a fraud? If they're gonna put out on air a product that says we are the champions of these communities, yet in their own newsrooms they're gonna treat you like this. How I can't imagine what that must have felt like.
I mean, I think in a way I felt betrayed. As an immigrant, when you come to the States, where my mom would get any immigration information was Univision. That's all we knew, really. Talk to this attorney, and this is what you can do. Healthcare, education, everything was there. So it was a platform that I trusted, and it's a platform where I knew I wanted to work towards, eventually making it and working there. So yeah, I mean, it was a slap in my face, and I think at the same time, I know that the reason why they were not as supportive was because I would speak up against injustices. Prior to Univision, I was an immigration activist, so I was very involved with the community. And if I ever saw anything, I would bring it up. I was never scared. And I think they didn't like the fact that, I wouldn't just stay quiet. And I think in a way, they always made me feel like, oh, you should be thankful because you're undocumented. And here, we gave the opportunity to work here. But I think, if undocumented or not, if I didn't have the qualifications to get the job, I wouldn't be where I was. So, after that happened, like I said, I felt betrayed, and I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know, who should I talk to? What should I do? And so I decided to speak up. I decided to share my story. I spoke to someone in La Opinión, which is a digital bilingual newspaper based out of LA. And she wrote the story, she wrote everything that happened, and within minutes, the story went viral. I never imagined that the other people had gone to similar situations as I did. People started reaching out on Facebook and social media from Telemundo, from Univision, Estrella TV, all these news stations saying, you know what? I worked on their TPS and I went through the same thing. I had a work permit and they kicked me as well. They kicked me out as well. And so, I think it opened,
Other news colleagues.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't know them, but it was other people in media, specifically in Spanish TV, who had experienced similar thing. And someone else, who was under TPS. They said, when under Trump, when he ended TPS, which is protects people from El Salvador, some people from Guatemala, her permit was going to expire, and they said, look, we're going to have to let you go. And they had her sign paperwork to not say anything about what happened, and they pretty much like just paid her out and kicked her out. And to me, it's like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe this is happening. But even though it was not a pleasant experience, I think it empowered me a lot. And it reminded me of, that we shouldn't fear. We shouldn't fear these corporations that at times do want to keep us, quiet, because there are others who might be experiencing things. And I think by speaking up and sharing my story, it also opened a lot of opportunities.
Well, you had a moment that you described where you didn't know who to call. You didn't know who was on your side. Just so you know, if you ever have a situation with your workplace, if you ever have a colleague who has a situation with their workplace, has anything to do with their immigration status, or anything to do with their ethnic identity or whatever, you got a friend in us 100%. Estefany, let me ask you this. Where does your fight come from? Like, I mean, obviously you're a fighter, you know what I mean? Like, you've got that fire. Like, where does it come from? What has forged this amazing TV producer? Like, there are a lot of people that produce TV, they stay quiet. They would stay quiet in this situation. What was it about your situation, or what is it about who you are that made it so that you were going to stand up for yourself?
It comes from my parents, for sure. I mean, my father was a journalist in Mexico. His main role was always advocating for those who were underrepresented. He fought a lot for people living in poverty, and it nearly cost him his life. Back then, it was around the 1970s. The El PRI, which is like a very corrupt political party, has always had power in Mexico. And when he would publish articles exposing the corruption that was going on in the government, people would go after him. And like I said, he was sent to be killed. Thankfully, the Lord saved him, and he's still alive. But to me, I feel like it was my role as a journalist to continue his legacy in a country where I felt I could be safe compared to doing journalism in Mexico. And my mother as well. I mean, my mother worked as a teacher in Mexico for over 30 years. And she always worked with kids who didn't have a lot of opportunities, but she always empowered them. So I think I've gotten that strength to speak up and to use the platforms and the talents that I have to help other people.
Has Univision apologized to you?
No. So when the article came out, the journalists did reach out to Univision, and they said that they couldn't discuss immigration information, private information with the public. So they just, their statement was very, plain. And I think something interesting as well is that I felt like the union that was representing the employees at Univision was also involved in the whole thing. I mean, the union representative was aware of everything that was going on. I copied her with work for my attorney for everything, explaining, what protections I could have as an undocumented immigrant, and they didn't do anything. It took about probably 2 months when I got my permit that they finally reached out. And I have the copy of the email, but basically they said, hey, we're just checking in to see if your permit arrived, and also just to let you know that your job is still available. And in my mind, I was like, why would you tell me that I would have to I would have to reapply for my job? And, why would you have me go through all of the stuff that I went through for in the end, for them to tell me like, hey, your job is still here. Like we saved your job. And I know that it was because they got a lot of heat, from people. I mean, I remember in the radio, here in the Bay Area, in New York, other people found out about it. So what were they going to do? Like, they had to put up that nice face, like, no, never mind. No, I don't know what she's talking about. We saved her spot. So I just, I just told them, I'm not interested, but I just hope that you stand by what you preach, and that you don't, have any other immigrant, undocumented immigrant, go through a similar experience, because it does hurt. I think after that, emotionally, I felt really drained, and I didn't know if I could have a future. I know some journalists who I worked with told me, how could you do that? How could you, say all these things about Univision? Like, the doors are going to be completely shut to you now. And to me, I was like, well, what? But you're my colleague. Like, you should support me. Like, it's not against the people. It's against, a company, and whoever is at top that should be, protecting and helping its employees. But I think something I learned, and at the same time, as we see with the Me Too movement, is that there's many people who are going to tell us that there's no change, like nothing's going to happen, or they're going to scare us. They're going to feed fear if we speak up. But I know that even though there's opposition, there's always people who are going to stand there with you and fight with you. And I have seen that since that experience at Univision and just throughout my time as an immigration activist.
So your story is incredible, and we definitely want to follow up. They owe you an apology, at least. But let's say this happens to somebody else. Let's say it happens on our coast over here back east or something like that. Somebody who doesn't know you, doesn't necessarily read La Opinión. Somebody who hasn't heard your story. Who are these allies that they should seek out in these positions if the union is going to collude with the network, Univision in this case, to persecute a dreamer, an undocumented youth? Who are the people who you would recommend that they reach out to, besides just, obviously you and Meet La Prensa? But who are on their side? Who are the allies that can be trusted in this?
I think, nonprofits for sure. United We Dream is huge, especially, in Washington, D.C. I reached out to the local immigration advocate groups. And then through connecting with them and a lot of immigration attorneys that do nonprofit work, they also help me get in contact with attorneys that deal with cases of retaliation or that protect the employee. So that's something that I learned, because we inform, but I didn't really have contacts when it came to job retaliation. So I learned a lot in the process. But I think for sure the nonprofits who deal with immigration are the best. Here in the Bay, I know Pico National Network has a big, it's a faith-based organization, but it works with a lot of grassroots organizations across the nation. But yeah, like I said, I think United We Dream does a lot to advocate for dreamers.
Okay. Well, last question. And we always ask this to first-time guests. Who are the most underrated workers in the American news business right now? This is your opportunity to shout out to some colleagues who are doing great work.
Well, I think there's a lot of great journalists who are working in smaller markets, and especially those who are out in the field shooting and editing their own stuff. I think now working at an English station, I see that there's so much help compared to when I was in a Spanish news station. But I think those journalists who do it all, they should really be highlighted, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot of discipline, and then also, you don't get paid very much for doing all those things.
Anyone in particular?
So someone in particular? Oh man, I don't know. There's a couple of people. I have friends that actually left network to work as independent journalists. So I guess I would say they definitely need some recognition, because it takes a lot to leave that comfort zone and go off on your own.
Right. Estefany, is there anything else you want to tell our Meet La Prensa audience today? As it stands, our audience is mostly Latinx news workers. So is there anything that you would tell them tonight in particular?
I think I think we have to acknowledge the fact that being bilingual is very empowering. Um, working in Spanish news for most of my career, I never realized how, lucky I was to speak English and Spanish. But as I made that transition to English TV, I realized like, wow, like we need more Latinos in the English newsrooms, because when we do talk about immigration or we talk about racial justice, and other issues, that's where you need to be at that table to create those conversations. And I think I always feared that I wasn't good enough to make it in the English market just because, English is my second language and I'm undocumented. And I always had this like, fears that I could never make it. But now being in English TV, I realized that people see you differently. Like they're so far I haven't had any negative experiences, but they're so careful when it comes to talking about immigration. And they like to listen. They're very my news director has been very respectful, and during the hiring process, I was waiting for the DACA renewal, so they were aware of everything that was going on. And even whenever we have a story on immigration, I know that I can go in there and talk to them about how I'm feeling. Um, so that, I mean, just a reminder that you are very powerful by speaking two languages, and you shouldn't fear that, being in a market that's not in your native tongue, it's not possible. I think it is. It can be hard, but I think we got it. Si se puede, and like our parents, being the first dreamers, I call them, coming into this great country, they taught us that we can do it. And I think we have to let go of that stigma that, I'm Latino, I need to stay in Spanish.
Right. Estefany Méndez, keep inspiring us all and defying the odds. Viewer, if you like this video, if you found it useful, if you found the value here, please like and subscribe. You can find Estefany's Twitter handle in the description for this video. Thank you so much for joining another episode of Meet La Prensa. That's a wrap.